A small dragon tries to flee in a dark room with many doors. An old man chases it, but when he turns around, he discovers that another man has locked the door, trapping him inside. The old man throws a ball of magic at the guy, but nothing happens. Many years later, it's a typical morning in London, but Paul is already having problems. He oversleeps, his shoelaces break, the toaster is damaged, and he has to rush all the way to the job interview location. On his way there, a strange old man named Monty interrupts and claims to have known Paul in the past. Paul does not recognize him and ignores him for the time being, hurrying to get in line. At that moment, a small dog steals Paul's scarf, forcing him to chase him down an alley. He suddenly loses sight of the dog, but there is a door labeled applicants, so he decides to go in. Inside a strange room, he discovers a woman named Sophie, who appears to be watching TV while waiting for the interview. Paul sits next to her and is unable to strike up a conversation, so he turns on the television, only to discover that he missed the company introduction. He still doesn't know what the job entails, only that the company is called Wells & Co. The brochure on the table is also ineffective, as it simply states, "Feeling lucky?" Mr. Tanner enters the room as laughter echoes throughout it. He dismisses another applicant before instructing Paul to follow him, apparently knowing his name without asking. They take the stairs to the main office, where the boss, Wells, is waiting with the other board members, Van Spee, Judy, and Casimir. They ask him a series of strange questions, and Paul responds as best he can, but he never stops feeling confused and awkward. He's also distracted by the cracks in the wallpaper, which he believes resemble a map of London. The others cannot see it, but Wells is impressed. Unfortunately, Tanner sends him away, claiming that they've heard enough. When Paul exits the building, he discovers the dog holding his scarf, almost as if the animal had been waiting. Moments later, Paul returns home and is upset to learn that his roommate is moving out, resulting in an argument because Paul cannot pay the rent alone. Suddenly, a strange claw pushes a letter through the mail slot, and Paul rushes to grab it, surprised to see it's from Wells when he never gave them his address. Even more surprising is the letter informing Paul that he passed the interview, which makes him happy. The next day, Paul arrives at work with a very positive attitude. Rosie, the receptionist, refuses to tell him what the job entails, and after giving him a mug, she summons Tanner, who picks up Paul and leads him through the building while explaining that they are a law firm and that computers are not permitted. When they arrive at the repair area, Tanner becomes concerned about a stapler on the floor and instructs Paul to walk carefully around it, telling him not to panic. They continue to pass through strange offices, including one with a giant map and numerous telephones, where Paul believes he sees Monty. They also go through one with a lot of typewriters and another with a bunch of tubes, but Paul has no idea what they're doing, and Tanner refuses to answer his questions. Tanner eventually leads Paul to the innermost office, where Sophie is also waiting. The two of them are now interns, and Tanner promises to bring them chores before leaving. Because of his nervousness, Paul talks non-stop, but he's awkward, and Sophie isn't impressed. Suddenly, a strange creature appears in the shadows, startling Paul from his seat. He moves closer to get a better look, but all he sees is a regular mouse. Rosie appears at this point and hands them a set of maps, instructing them to circle the locations where bauxite deposits can be found. Paul has no idea what he's doing, but he spends the entire morning with Sophie inspecting the maps. The duo pauses for lunch, and on their way downstairs, Sophie says she wants coffee, which is strange given that she just said she didn't like it. Then they run into Judy, who takes them to a park. Suddenly, a sewer lid opens and a canister is thrown out, which Judy grabs. Sophie then explains that the lady on the bench is reading Atonement, and that when she reads about the character jumping into the fountain, she needs to signal to her. Sophie can't help but wonder how she knows where she is in the book, so Judy tells her to stand in the bushes and watch from afar. Sophie concentrates, and to her surprise, she sees what the woman does. When the reader reaches the appropriate section of the book, Sophie gives a signal, and Judy moves her finger, causing the man sitting by the fountain to fall into the water. The lady on the bench rushes over to check, and a romantic relationship is soon formed. Judy compliments Sophie on a job well done, explaining that the man's parents had spent a lot of money to arrange for their son to marry the lady on the bench, but doing it this way makes them believe it was destiny. A perplexed Paul inquires as to what's going on, and Judy explains that Sophie is a seer, which means she possesses mental abilities. Then Judy explains exactly what the company does. It turns out that the majority of Wells' employees are capable of magic. They are practical wizards who use their magic to serve clients for a fee. Although Sophie is an intern, she is already on a completely different level than Paul, and Judy only brings Sophie with her. Paul returns to the attic office and eats a sandwich while looking at the maps. When he moves his hand to brush away the breadcrumbs, he experiences an unusual sensation in his palm. Curious, he moves his hand above the map, feeling a strange sensation and realizing that changes are occurring on the paper. At that point, Wells enters the office and instructs Paul to look straight ahead while continuing to feel the map with his palm. A current suddenly strikes Paul's fingers, pointing to the location of bauxite deposits. Paul appears to have supernatural abilities, allowing him to detect the location of specific objects. Excited by this turn of events, Wells leads Paul to his own office through a room full of printers. He explains that the company is fighting for its survival and that they require a diviner to help everyone get back on track. Wells believes Paul could be that diviner. Tanner is waiting for them at the office, and in order to gain Paul's support, Wells brings up Paul's irresponsible father, saying he completely understands how he feels. Wells' father, the original company founder, forced his son to sign a contract in which he sold his soul in order to permanently control him. Wells understands Paul's desire to prove himself, so he assigns him an important task. Paul must locate a portable door, but he cannot tell anyone about this mission. Paul agrees, but before he can ask for clues or details, he is kicked out. Then Paul decides to search for the door in the company building, floor by floor, touching every wall, window, and door with no success. He is abruptly interrupted by Van Spee, whose magical hair moves on its own while she speaks. She chit-chats and appears friendly, but when she mentions illegal magic, her hair spells beware. After Paul leaves, the nearby door blends into the wall. Later at home, Paul tries to sleep, but is abruptly awakened by Casimir. His ability is to control dreams, so this isn't real. He wants to know why Wells hired Paul, but Paul keeps it a secret as promised. Casimir, enraged, uses magic to begin bending Paul's leg, making his teeth fall out and his ears grow enormous. Although this is a dream, Paul is terrified and can't help but tell him the truth. Casimir explains that the portable door can open the Bank of the Dead and prepares to leave. Paul briefly believes he is waking up, but it is still a dream, and he is knocked down. The next day, Sophie arrives at work to find Rosie kissing a stapler. Meanwhile, Paul searches the company building and discovers the words Bank of the Dead with an arrow spelled on the floor using stapler fasteners. Following the arrow, Paul descends, and his hands quickly react to the energy on the walls, revealing some incredible artwork. He eventually discovers a dimly lit basement and a roll-up door with the message Goblins Only. Paul opens the door anyway, but what he finds inside is an ordinary storeroom. Tanner arrives before he can thoroughly inspect it and kicks him out, telling him he isn't allowed in there and advising Paul to leave before something bad happens to him. Meanwhile, Sophie continues to work with Judy, who receives messages from the hands emerging from the sewers. Judy explains that those hands belong to goblins, who have been working with wizards for years and can observe humans undetected. For today's mission, Judy has Sophie sign a lost pet in a store so the owner can reunite with her cousin in a few days. This lost dog turns out to be a photograph of the dog wearing Paul's scarf. Back to Paul, he continues to search the building with no success. When he returns to his office, he finds Tanner arguing with Sophie about an issue with her contract. It's time to go home, and Sophie can't stop herself from eating a bunch of licorice, despite the fact that she previously stated that she hated it. Suddenly, she becomes disgusted, and Paul takes her to a pub to drink and clean her mouth. They talk for a while before getting into an argument about who performs better at work. The next day, Paul runs into Casimir at work, but he acts as if they're seeing each other for the first time since their interview. Afterward, Paul takes the stairs and runs into Monty, who admits he purposefully distracted Paul the other day so he would take this company's interview instead of his original one. Monty does not want to let Paul pass, but the boy insists on returning to the mysterious room he saw yesterday. Following the sensations on his hand, Paul realizes that the objects inside are an illusion and immediately crosses it, entering a different room filled with strange specimens and various magical items. After a while of playing, Paul discovers a stapler on the floor and is pushed back when he attempts to touch it. Using his abilities, Paul tries again and discovers the spirit of a goblin within the stapler. The creature points him in a specific direction before disappearing, and Paul focuses his power on his hands, allowing him to finally bring the portable door out of hiding. Curious, Paul enters the door, and as he closes it, the portable door transforms into a towel, and he appears in another part of the building. Paul hears voices coming from an office and peeks inside to find Wells discussing Paul's father and the disappearance of the company's former boss. It has been revealed that Wells traffics human souls and uses its employees as test subjects. Once they sign a soul contract, they lose all sense of self, and Sophie is Wells' next target, which explains her recent change in tastes. To make matters worse, the rest of the board is unaware of this, and everyone's badges include special surveillance devices. Paul realizes he can't give them the portable door, so he picks up the towel and after a few failed attempts, reads the label's instructions. Teleportation could be accomplished by reciting a spell and specifying the destination. To test it, Paul mentions the supermarket, and as he walks through, he finds himself in the freezer. Despite the strange looks he receives, Paul picks up the towel and returns to the company, where he runs into Van Spee. She reminds him to come to her if he knows anything, but he ignores her and rushes to his office. When he arrives, he immediately tears Sophie's badge and throws it away while explaining what is going on, then pulls out the towel to back up his story. Paul mutters the spell to open the door, only to find himself in an unfamiliar environment with numerous portable doors on every surface. Sophie hears someone asking for assistance, but Paul quickly pulls her out and rereads the label, realizing he must state the destination before opening the door. He tries again, and this time they successfully reach Paul's apartment. Sophie is excited by the possibilities of such power and immediately starts dragging Paul around the world. They travel to Egypt and Alaska, surf in Jamaica, and even see the Aurora Borealis. They continue to show up for work, and Sophie sees the cousins reunite at the shop, which makes her proud that she is using her abilities for good. But when no one is looking or they have a break, they continue to travel, and the more time they spend together, the closer they become. Paul tells Sophie he likes her while they are at the beach. Sophie thinks she likes him, but she signed a soul contract and is unsure if her feelings for Paul are genuine. As a result, they agree to find and destroy the contract. The duo returns to the company via the portable door, and Paul just manages to hide the towel before Tanner walks in. However, he notices their clothes and the sand on the ground and quickly realizes what's going on. He demands that Paul return the door and leave the company permanently if he does not want serious consequences, and then he leaves. Paul and Sophie start arguing about what to do and decide to return later for her contract. After nightfall, the duo sneaks back into the company building, but the portable door is unable to transport them to Wells' office and instead drops them off in the printer room. The printers work independently, printing gym membership contracts, rental agreements, and other documents. It turns out that Wells secretly added soul agreements to these everyday contracts in order to trick people into agreeing to sell their souls. Then they hear some noises, and after noticing a stapler on the floor, they follow the sounds and moving shadows into the map room, where papers are flying and small fires are burning. There's a creature in the shadows eating a pizza, so a terrified Paul opens the portable door to try to return to Wells' office, but the door leads them to a dark basement with Bank of the Dead written on the floor. After discovering a contract that confirms they are stealing souls, the duo begins hearing noises again and decides to flee through a terrifying tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, they come across a group of goblins. Panicking, they flee and end up behind the goblins-only door, where Tanner unexpectedly appears. He turns out to be a shape-shifting goblin who also serves as the clan's leader. As he chastises them for not listening to his warnings, Wells appears. Wells orders Tanner and his goblins to leave, but Tanner refuses, claiming that without the goblins, the wizards are useless. An argument ensues, and Wells uses his magic to transform a group of goblins into office supplies. Paul and Sophie take advantage of the opportunity to escape by opening the portable door, but they overlook a rule. Whoever closes the door owns it, and as a result, Wells jumps on it to reclaim control. Now that the duo is trapped in the space with all of the doors, they hear a voice, Wells Sr. It has been revealed that Wells used a baby dragon to lure his father to this location, trap him there, and then took over the company. Paul recalls Wells Sr. having a contract that should allow him to control his son, but the man explains that he can't use it because the soul contract must be deposited in the Bank of the Dead for it to be effective. Thinking they still have a chance, Paul starts looking for an exit, but there are doors everywhere. Wells Sr. claims he has already tried and that all doors lead to emptiness. However, Paul focuses on using his powers, and after much effort, he eventually finds the exit. They emerge from the streets, and an ecstatic Wells Sr. takes them back to the company, where he begins making plans. He instructs Paul to take Wells' contract to the bank, while he goes to confront his evil son, and Rosie goes to pick up her husband. The group rushes downstairs where the goblins are transporting all of the soul contracts away. Wells Sr. immediately locates his son and begins a fierce battle in which they exchange dozens of magical attacks, destroying the room and causing the goblins to panic. As magical energy flies everywhere, Paul and Sophie attempt to sneak around to retrieve the door, but Paul is knocked down and captured by a group of goblins. Sophie uses her powers to attempt to contact Judy for assistance, but the goblins charge at her. Paul is desperate to save Sophie and fences off the goblins, only to become caught in a net. At that point, Rosie arrives with a stapler and throws it at Wells Sr., who uses his magic to strike the stapler, revealing a goblin trapped inside. Then Rosie reveals that her true form is also a goblin, and she rushes to meet with the recently released guy, explaining that they are Tanner's parents. While the family shares a touching moment, Wells seizes the opportunity to launch a surprise attack on his father, trapping him once more. Paul attempts to jump on him, but Wells' magic is quick and knocks him away. The other board members arrive at the scene and try to stop Wells, but he keeps them away by threatening to kill his father. Then, using his magic, he traps Sophie and asks Paul to hand over his soul contract in exchange for her life. Sophie then telepathically communicates with Paul, informing him that he can use his abilities to create portal doors from zero. Paul concentrates and extends his hand, causing multiple doors to appear in front of him. He summons one of them and rushes into the death bank, handing over Wells' soul contract to an employee while requesting a special trade. When the employee retrieves the signer's soul, Wells' powers vanish, allowing Wells Sr. to use magic to trap his evil son, while Sophie retrieves the towel and opens the door to the dark room. Then Wells Sr. locks his son inside as retaliation for what he has been through in recent years. Afterward, Wells Sr. tears off the towel's usage instructions, claiming that the door will never open again. Sophie is concerned about Paul, but he returns with his own powers and hands Sophie her own contract, which he received in exchange for Wells. As everyone celebrates, the two finally kiss. Paul then grabs the towel and throws it inside a laundry truck, ensuring that no one else has access to it. Finally, the board meets with Sophie and Paul and offers them permanent jobs. They both accept, and Sophie, using telepathy, informs Paul that her feelings are genuine, so they hold hands. Meanwhile, the towel arrives at a hotel, where a maid accidentally says the spell. Alright, that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, it really helps the channel. Leave a comment with your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching and see you next time.